And now I'm going to introduce you to Teresa, who, bless her soul, it's bad to know people. So we were talking about this event and really got excited about about the idea of presenting you with somebody I think has just the best, it's just so good at this. And it's going to work. I know this is going to work. We practice. Okay, ready? Okay, there you go. So Teresa's got a really cool resume. If you're on this call and you're a high school kid, I encourage you to try to find her on LinkedIn and link up that so you can be connected with her, because that's how you build your network. And if you can see her experience here, she has a ton of experience. It's very multifaceted, and she's a really good role model for how one path can lead you a lot of different directions. So with that, I just want to say thank you to Teresa, and I'm going to let you get started.
All right. If you can go to the next slide, Carmen, I appreciate it. I did include all the background slides for everybody to go back and reference at a later time. And like Carmen said, I really do appreciate people reaching out to me. So I am on the web just about everywhere, but LinkedIn is definitely something I highly recommend our high school folks at least start thinking about how to create your online presence. And so it goes kind of really nicely with this professional presence that I'm going to be talking about. You just graduated high school and you're already having to think about professional presence. And I think of it more like this is your brand. So how would you want to rebrand yourself or maybe improve on your current brand? So, you're a high school senior, you're kind of, top of the pecking order, and now you get to start all over again, and how daunting that might be. So I just want you to think about it and think about what you actually want to rebrand yourself as. If things were going well for you, great, let's make it better. And if things weren't, think about what you would want to redo if given the chance. And this is actually your opportunity. So congratulations on completing a major milestone, but it's only the beginning. So the three things that you would have to consider when you're considering your brand, right? Your personal expression, and we'll go into more detail about that in the next couple of slides, but it's basically how you put that little signature mark on everything you do that everybody knows it's actually you. Some people like to put little smiley faces at the end of their sentences or their cards, or, it's just that little exclamation point that you add to the world. Communications cover many things, written and oral, but it also non-verbal communications, right? How you're messaging what you want to say, but also how people perceive it. So you may not actually mean how things come across, whether it's verbal or in writing. So it's just as important how people perceive your communication as it is how you communicate. The other aspect is relational dimensions. It's basically how you interact with others. Sometimes that kind of pairs really well with communications and nonverbal cues. That actually goes a long ways with the message itself. And so I want to share that bottom line there with you. And this is something that I basically summarized after watching a lot of really successful people that I think are really great models kind of brand themselves. That's always been really interesting to me. I'm not a big, how shall I say, I'm not a big fan of any one person, or like I'm not a big Steve Jobs fan, for example, because I think people are flawed. But I always try to learn what I can from folks so that I can have takeaways from them that benefit me. And so I think everybody has something to contribute. So to me, you have to think about becoming strategic about how you present yourself, because really that has the potential to impact you for the rest of your life. And what do I mean about being strategic? You always have to think at least 5 years ahead when you're coming up with your personal brand. You know, it's okay when you're going through school, you want to kind of be very narrowly focused so that your world really is, you know, the people close around you. But once you're out into the real world, you don't know just what an impact you have until you look beyond your little circle of friends. So when you're becoming strategic, you're forcing yourself to think outside of your box, or reaching out beyond your circle of influence so that you can pull in more tidbits about how the real world actually works. So just think about that, because I think by the end of the presentation, I want you to actually define how your persona is going to be thinking 5 years out. And then every 5 years from then, you should be updating it, right? So go ahead and go to the next slide, Carmen. Oops. So just so you know, I love RuPaul. This is nothing against RuPaul at all. But I want this image to kind of get you thinking about the persona that you're trying to portray, and how your personal expression actually dictates to people what your style is, how confident you are, and whether or not you're taking up space appropriately. And you notice that, you know, RuPaul has two very big, bold personas, and it all depends on what he's trying to get across, who he ends up being, or who he shows up as. So I want you to think about it, and I want you to think about how people actually interpret those personas, right? You want to be known for what's in your head and not what's external, right? You want to be commended for your abilities and your work, or what you bring to the table, but not necessarily what you show up as. But here, RuPaul is actually very, very successful at doing both, in both personas, right? He comes across extremely confident no matter which RuPaul shows up. And then he also is very successful in getting across the image that not only is he really good at what he does, but he also looks really good no matter what he does it in. So I want you to think about dressing appropriately, but I want you to also not shy away from being yourself. Confidence makes a world of difference in how you present yourself. So if you are the type of person that likes to be very flashy, and I am not, I'm not going to discourage you from being that way, but I want you to also back it up with work, right? I want you to back it up with ability. You have to bring that to the table if you're going to come to the table with an all-out image. So just think about that. The quote that you see at the bottom is actually something that I heard Michelle Obama say when I watched her Becoming documentary, right? You know that she's in the limelight and she's being judged. I mean, she's a lawyer, a very, very smart lawyer, I believe, from Stanford. And yet people judge her based on what she's wearing. And that's really just disappointing, but it's so true, right? So rather than be a victim of it, use it as a tool. And as an engineer, I'm all about tools. It's always having the right tool to do the job that makes all the difference in the world. So if you're going to be judged anyway, might as well make fashion the tool that you can wield. Next slide, Carmen. All right. So the other aspect of expressing yourself, your professional presence, is communication. And I talked about this a little at the beginning, but there's a lot of things that you need to consider with communication styles, right? There are a lot of tools out there that help you try to define what type of personality you have. A lot of that also indicate what type of communication styles you may prefer. So on the right-hand side, the little pie chart there you'll find that there are groupings of personalities or styles that kind of map to kind of the, this reminds me of, what was that movie with the little emotions, the little animated movie with all the characters and the emotions. And I tend to be a very reflective person, number 4, and an auditory person. I like to actually sit back and observe rather than speak. I'm not impressed by flashy things. I actually like more cerebral things. So I like time to reflect. I like things that make me think. That's more like me. But if that's my communication style, it probably makes me not a very good presenter. In fact, I get really, really nervous when I have to present in front of a lot of people. But I am wonderful as a one-on-one mentor. So I work really well one-on-one with people, and I work really well when I have to come up with something like a document or a presentation, something in writing. That's just my strength. So you need to find what your strengths are when it comes to communication styles. And when you do that, make sure you can communicate clearly, completely, and the most important, concisely, which means you gotta be brief. You can't get your idea across if you're being too wordy. And you may have very brilliant ideas, like it says in the bottom, but if you can't get it across, you're not going to be able to get anywhere or promote your ideas or get somebody to actually buy into your ideas if you can't communicate it well enough. The grid at the bottom has to do with candor. And to me, being able to communicate honestly is just as important as being able to communicate. In fact, if you communicate but you're not honest, you're really not being very genuine. And to me, if you're branding yourself as somebody fake, people will see right through that. So you have to be genuine and you have to be honest. And you can be honest without being downright mean, right? There's no reason for you to be mean when you're responding honestly to something or someone, right? There's always a better way to say it honestly, and you never have to compromise your integrity in doing so. So I just wanted to at least highlight that. Next slide, Carmen. All right. This I added because I thought it's very relevant to especially young people, but you know, everybody has to actually pay attention to this. I think Carmen mentioned this briefly as well earlier. You know, your online presence makes a big difference because it represents you. And a lot of times people feel like their online presence is a way for them to kind of debrief or relax or vent, but I'm here to tell you it's really not. All the online communication tools that are at your disposal, and there are so many, it's all an extension of you, and it's all part of your personal branding. So when you're out there bad mouthing people on Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat, that will all reflect on you. So think about that the next time you angrily tweet or angrily send an email. Remember that everything online lives forever, and it can always be traced back to you. And even if it doesn't like impact you in a way that you know, it impacts how people perceive you after they meet you, if they have experienced that side of you via your online rants, right? Posting pictures that are inappropriate also online also is a way for you to brand yourself, but not well. Think about, if you're sharing it with your friends probably have some connection to somebody that probably may work with you or may go to school with you, or you may need someday to refer you for a job. And so if that image of you is their first impression of you and it wasn't flattering, you may not get the best results when you actually need them for something else. I guess the old adage is if you're going to be embarrassed that your parents or grandparents see something you post, you probably shouldn't post it. There are probably many ways to vent. I recommend athletics, go for a run, go for a swim, do something physical that just kind of gets, your energy flowing in a positive direction. If you need to vent, don't do it online the way that, I've seen most people do. Because like I said, it will come back to haunt you. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but sometime in the future. Just keep that in mind. Next slide, Carmen. All right. So the relationship dimension, right? Your ability to relate and interact with others. Etiquette comes under this, even though I think etiquette kind of goes with just about the other two aspects as well, because there's an etiquette to communication, there's an etiquette to the way you present yourself. Etiquette means a lot of things to a lot of people, but it's kind of a thread that's kind of common across the board. And what does etiquette actually really mean? To me, it's all about manners, right? We don't actually teach manners in school. Maybe we do, but it's kind of lacking. We kind of see that people aren't just very nice to one another. And it's probably because we've just been so busy that we forget that there are other people in our space. We just have to think about treating others the way we want to be treated. And so when you think about etiquette, just think about just the unwritten rule of how you want to behave when no one's watching, right? You want to behave exactly the same way when no one's watching as you do when someone is watching. I think I read something somewhere that explains etiquette really well. You know how when you go grocery shopping and you're done with your cart in the parking lot and you don't know what to do with it? What makes you actually go put that cart back into the little stall or bring it back inside the grocery store? Nothing. There's no law forcing you to return the cart, right? Nobody's watching you telling you to please go put the cart back into the rack, but we do it anyway. Most of us do. And most of us do it because it's the right thing to do. Nobody has to tell us, to go do it. People just expect common courtesy that people return the cart so that sometime later when someone needs it, it's there. So to me, this relation I can't even say it, this relationship that you have with one another, it's kind of like an unspoken rule. You know, you treat me with respect, I will treat you with respect in return. But for me, I think of it as you should treat them with respect regardless of whether or not they treat you with respect in return, because it's who you are, it's not how people treat you, right? And the quote at the bottom actually says a lot. Your attitude really does define how far you go. And this quote says how high you go, but that's the same thing, right? So just think about that as part of your branding. Next slide, Carmen. Carmen, next slide. Thank you. I love this image, by the way. And the reason why I love this image, and it talks about the tools that you have at your disposal to actually help portray a really professional image. And she's doing this virtually, you know, during this whole online, you know, working from home type thing. I think this image actually portrays the perfect representation of how you project confidence, even in an online environment. So some of the things that you do need to consider when you're portraying this confidence factor is your eyes. It probably has the most effect on people when you're talking or communicating. So do what you can. I know not everybody feels comfortable, but do what you can to look people in the eye when you're talking to them. And I know that sometimes culturally that's not acceptable, and that's actually all right, depending on where, as long as the person receiving it knows where you're coming from, right? You're doing it out as a sign of respect. That's the way you're taught. You're not doing it out of respect. And so people know your intent, even when you're doing it and it's not culturally acceptable, they'll forgive you. And ask for forgiveness if that's, you know, against cultural norms. But it doesn't mean that you can't be genuine in doing so. Your face. Relax, breathe. It shows on your face when you're tense. You don't necessarily have to smile. You can if you want to, but be natural. And again, be genuine. If you are not a normal smiler, don't smile. But you can very easily tell if someone's relaxed or not just by watching their face, their eyebrows furl, or you know, they start to frown. So your face actually communicates a lot more than what you do sometimes. Your body. So the first photo in this deck is just amazing because it has two stands on there that projects confidence, right? The folding of your arm and standing, to me, just tells people that you're self-assured and you know what you bring to the table. If you stand before a talk, for example, if you stand with your arms on your hips, it actually helps you relax, and it actually kind of puts you in the position of power, so that you feel like you're empowering yourself to kind of go into a room or present. And so I actually highly recommend, before you have presentations or before you do something nerve-wracking, stand at attention with your hand on your hip or with your hand straight out, kind of a power pose before you go. And you'll feel actually amazing once you start. I also recommend doing this before like something physical too, like getting ready to start a race or, you know, do a deadlift, but it really helps get you going. So I definitely practice this. By the way, this pose I'm definitely going to use at the next Comic-Con that I go to, because it's an amazing pose. So I'm working that into my repertoire. You go back to the previous slide. Okay, so then voice. It actually says that if you lower your voice, you actually come across better. High-pitched voice tends to be not as well received, and I feel bad for people who do have high-pitched voices. But you also need to talk at a conversational pace, which means you need to slow down. The other aspect of projecting confidence is actually pausing during your presentation. And this is something that I actually don't do enough of and I need practice on. But filling that space or that void when you're talking or when you're presenting is not necessary. You actually want to have pauses and silence because you want people to actually take in what you're saying. And don't like hit them with just an onslaught of just, verbal communications, because that can be a little bit overwhelming. So these 6 things, if you practice, you'll become better at it. And like I said, probably of all the things that are on here, most of the non-communication cues, so what isn't said, is actually the most important thing when it comes to communication. Next slide, Carmen. All right. So this actually pulls everything together. So like I mentioned earlier, if you're a type of person that don't like to present, but you're really good with one-on-one or maybe small group meetings, all 3 of these things, you have to consider who the audience is for each one of those situations, and then modify your material so that they can take away something that is important to you, but also important to them. So that middle area there where it says, it references the relevance of the information, that's the only bit of information that people actually take away from a communication in any situation. So your goal actually is to try to figure out in every single one of those situations, what is it that is important to them, and what do you want to say that will actually have the most impact to your listener. So your goal actually is to push these 2 little circles closer together so the relevance can actually be larger. And sometimes you'll find that you actually don't have a lot of things in common and that your circles actually go away from one another. So what do you do when you actually find out that your audience really doesn't want to hear anything you have to say and you have a lot to say? Well, then you do research, right? You go and figure out what your audience wants, what are their needs, and you tailor your communication styles or your presentation materials or even your own image so that you can capture their interest and then you gain their partnership. So I think of this as more like when you're going into a new environment, whether it's school or work, you have nothing in common with any of the people that are there, or at least you feel like you don't. And you'll never know unless you actually go and do your research and find out and ask questions. And so to me, the introverts or the people that are kind of the observers, remember that little pie chart with the little color thing? The people that are more cerebral, like they actually like to sit back and watch, those are the people that are great researchers. They collect a lot of information. They have a lot of know-how. They know how things work. So your job is to actually either go collect that information, but if you're not that type of a person, go find an introvert, go find a quiet person that likes to observe and ask them, hey, what do you think about this place? Or what are your opinions about this person? Or how do you think I can connect, to either your new boss or your new work environment, just so you can get ahead. I think one of the things that most people have heard but probably haven't practiced is you want to treat, the janitor with the same respect that you treat the CEO. And the reason why is, believe it or not, the janitor probably has a lot of information you may need someday, and it probably has a ton of connections you didn't even know that they had until you talk to them. I am always nice to ROAs because ROAs have access to all our execs. They have their calendar, they know their family, they know their kids. If I want to get in good with a CEO or an executive, I go make friends with the OA. And you would be amazed how far you can actually get. And like I mentioned earlier, you have to be genuine. You can't fake it because they can spot you coming a mile away. But I also know that because you are nice and you are genuine, you will probably get that OA to bend over backwards to get you some time on some exec's calendar to get you the opportunity to pitch your idea, right? So it's all about selling yourself. It's all about making you matter, making what you have to say matter, being relevant. So I hope that helps. And I can't remember if that was my last slide. I think it is, Carmen. Right? All right. Oh, always ways to improve yourself. So I didn't even know this little triangle existed until after I did this presentation. But defining your professional strategy, this kind of brings everything all together. Everything on this little triangle we actually talked about, right? We talked about messaging or your branding. It calls it a logo, but really your branding is your message, how you come across to the world and how the world perceives you. It talks about attitude, right? Having the right attitude makes all the difference in the world. It talks about your voice, and that this is not like literal voice. It really is what you have to say, right? Your basically what you believe in. That's your voice, and you should always be building on that and always be promoting that. Your tone, if people find and hear that you're coming across to them with a really negative tone, even if you really believe in something, you need to bring people on board with a tone that projects that you are willing and able to partner, and you're not about just yelling. Yeah, like you don't want to come across yelling at them. Your audience, we mentioned you need to know your audience and you need to craft your messaging so that they're more receptive of you. So this little triangle, actually, I need to modify it so that it's more office centric, more of a personal branding thing. So maybe I'll work on that in my next presentation or the next time I give this. But this triangle actually just kind of combines everything that you've heard kind of really nicely, so that when you continue to build on it, you keep these in mind, because it probably will never change. You will grow and you will get better, but you need to create a balance so that you keep all three of these things in mind. Your voice to me is your moral compass. Your messaging is how you actually portray that, and in your audience is how they perceive that. Practice, ask for help, record yourself, evaluate. This is hard because a lot of people don't like it when others evaluate you. But guess what? They're already doing it, right? So you might as well enlist them to help you get better, right? People evaluate you whether or not you know it or not, and they probably won't give you feedback unless you ask. So you might as well ask, and ask the right people, right? Ask people that matter, and don't pay attention to anybody else that don't. So I think that's all I have. If I have questions, I'd be happy to take them.
I have one question so far, and if anybody else is listening, I'm just going to go back to your favorite picture. We have one question about if someone posts something about me that's not a personal representation that I want portrayed about me, how can I go about dismissing it or downplaying it or lowering its relevance to me?
Well, I think you should talk to the person first directly, right, and explain where you're coming from. I don't know if you need to necessarily dismiss it. I think confronting it head on is how I would like to approach things, and just either own what it is that they either said that you did, right? I think it speaks volumes, especially if it's something about it is true. Because usually when people gossip about you, there is some truth to the matter. Take the sting away by owning up to the truth, right? Basically, what you do when you do that is you change the narrative. It no longer becomes their story. It is now your story because you owned up to it. And then now you can explain from your perspective where you go from there. I hope that helps. Oh, you're on mute, Carmen.
You have another question. Have you experienced an almost unshakable nervousness, bless your soul who wrote this, when interacting with new professional people? How do you overcome feeling very nervous and talking to crowds or new people? How do you deal with that when you're just frozen?
I know. Well, I am a nervous wreck, believe it or not. This is why I was in choir and I was in band and I could never do solos. In fact, even when it came time to testing, I froze. But I did great in groups. So go figure. But like I said, one-on-one, I do better. So here's how I would approach it. Everybody gets nervous and everybody has been in your shoes. And most people are very empathetic. So if you start out by just saying, I am really nervous, but this is important to me and I want to get this question out. Please give me some leeway, right? Basically ask people to forgive your nervousness, but you're going to say what you have to say anyway. And you'd be amazed at how accommodating people can be for that. I think I've noticed this when, people perform on stage, for example, and they get really nervous and they just admit, I'm really nervous. So what do people do when people say that? They start clapping, right? They encourage you to go on. People are very kind when you open up and share what your insecurities are. So if you're nervous about meeting people or you're nervous about being in a professional environment and you don't know how to act, just say it. Say you're nervous. Say you don't know if you're doing this right. But here's what I'm trying to get at or what I'm trying to say. Please be patient with me. And you'd be amazed at what people do allow you to do. So you can get your point across. That was a really good question, by the way.
That was a great question. So we're on final questions. So people who are watching, this is your last chance to get this amazing hands-on, direct, experiential question that you can have for the rest of your life. I wish I would have heard this conversation about 2 decades ago. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Teresa, I think it's really great that you are giving us tools for, staying in our our lane. That's kind of what I say, my dance space, and then also how you can dance with other people. So I appreciate it very much. You are a lovely human being. Your volunteer time means the world to us. I'm so grateful. I'm going to let it go, you guys.